Welcome everyone to the Recurly webinar here on creating an effective dunning strategy. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll give folks just another minute here to trickle in while I kind of walk through some admin related material, and then we'll get on to the presentation. My name is Alex Kroll. I'll be our moderator today. I'm a Recurly customer operations specialist. My goal at Recurly is to help our customers get the most value out of the program. And one of those main elements is dunning. It's such an important aspect of your Recurly profile, and we want all of our merchants to optimize their dunning. So I'll be your moderator. Our moderator today. We'll be hearing from Rachel Quick, who is our Senior Director of Customer Operations. Rachel has a wealth of experience around subscriptions. She's been with Recurly for just over 10 years. She's an absolute expert when it comes to Recurly and dunning in particular. So there will be a follow-up email here to everyone that joins us today with a recording. So if you'd like to share this webinar with your colleagues, that's entirely possible. We'll also be having a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. On the right side of your screen, you should see a little a vertical box. This is kind of just your webinar admin console where you can ask any questions. Feel free to do so throughout the webinar. I'll be keeping track of those, and we'll relay them to Rachel as soon as we get to the Q&A session. And just the last thing here, we do have another webinar coming up in just a couple of weeks around gift cards. This will be another fantastic presentation by Rachel to help you optimize gift cards, particularly in getting ready for the end of the year. So with that, Rachel, I'll go ahead and pass it over to you to kick off the presentation here.
Great, thank you, Alex. And it looks like someone is having some issues with audio. So folks, if you're having trouble hearing, or I suppose you can't hear me, can anyone comment if they are hearing audio just fine? Maybe over in that chat on the right side of the screen.
Looks like we're seeing some positive reception there.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, well, thank you for the introduction, Alex. So as he mentioned, my name is Rachel Quick. I'm the Senior Director of Customer Operations here at Recurly. And I just celebrated my 10-year anniversary at Recurly. And dunning is a set of functionality that is near and dear to my heart. Before I joined Recurly, I was at 2 startups dealing with dunning all day, every day. That was my job. It was, every day following up on customers who were past due and trying to bring as much revenue into the company as possible. And when I saw Recurly get started, I knew I wanted to jump in on that and be part of it. So a lot of what I bring you today is just talking about, how this can be automated, how you can build it out, and really turn this from a manual process to a really fine-tuned process that can help your business and bring in as much of that potentially lost revenue as possible. So feel free as I'm talking here to post questions. I'll be keeping an eye on it. If something I can answer in context, I'll go ahead and do that. Otherwise, we do have that Q&A at the end. So let's get started here. So let's just start out with some basics here on what is dunning. So dunning is actually, a process of attempting to collect on a failed payment or a failed invoice. And when a customer, attempts to renew a subscription, or they have a one-time transaction that fails payment, it enters what we call a dunning period. And typically during that period, the subscription remains active while Recurly automations take over to reach out to the customer and also retry the transaction. So it is important to note that this is actually a 2-pronged process. We talk about dunning as sort of one cohesive thing, but it is actually 2 separate. So the first part is really the card recycling, or the retries. And that is the part that Recurly does for you. The second part is actually the customer communication, or delinquent user notification, which is where dunning typically comes from, although I've heard different definitions in the past. And Recurly does take this over for you as well. but you actually have the option to configure this to meet your customer needs. And we'll talk about the different configurations and options as we move ahead. So, first and foremost, when we think about dunning, we have to think about how long are you going to let a customer go past due? How long are you going to let them use your product before you shut them off for non-payment? And there are a couple considerations to take into place. The first is your product B2B or B2C? Typically, our B2B companies want to have a longer dunning period just because the product might be more mission critical and because payment can be a little more trickier when you're navigating purchase orders and accounting teams and accounts payable. Whereas with B2C, that's typically someone paying with a credit card right then and there. And if they're not paying you, you don't want to give them the service. So that's typically a little bit shorter. We do recommend that dunning is no longer than the length of your shortest subscription. And the reason why is because you don't want to have a customer who has failed, or has a declining payment to renew again for another month before they've paid that first past due invoice. So keep it short and sweet for those monthly subscriptions, and try to get that customer within one bill cycle back in good standing. And then finally, you want to think about too, before you end this dunning cycle is, what did it cost to get this customer? And we'll talk a little bit about some use cases, some specific customers, but there are times when, you may want to allow invoice looping. You may want to allow them a long period of time, but in general, we say about 28 days. So when you're looking at the length of dunning, this is something that you control by configuring the email schedule. So in this example here, we are looking at an email cadence that, about 3 to 4 days apart for B2C. These are people you want to remind very frequently, try to get them in there, try to get them to update their payment. In and out quickly is the goal for B2C. But for your B2B customers, you might not want to remind them as often. Again, it's probably some of those inner politics of moving through an accounts payable department. And sometimes they can get frustrated with getting a lot of emails. So, keeping that cadence of short and sweet for B2C and then longer with fewer emails for your B2B customers. And what you can see over on the right side of the screen is how you adjust the length between the different emails, and then how you can add additional emails to this cadence. So one thing to keep in mind here is, here's a dunning schedule that isn't super effective. The customer goes past due and you don't reach out to them for 7 days. They have a whole week where they're using your product and they haven't received any communication. And then 3 days after that, so 10 total days, then the subscription expires and the invoice fails. Not a lot of email updates, not a lot of time for retries, which we'll talk about in a little bit. You gave that customer 10 days to pay, and had they not paid and gone through this process successfully, you would have terminated their subscription and their invoice would have been written off as bad debt. So here's something that's a little bit more effective. So here's a series of emails that's sent over 16 days, and the customer receives a series of emails. So they're receiving an email right away, and then every 5 or so days, they're receiving emails. And what you'll also notice is that each of these emails is a different template. So over time, the emails are increasing in their sense of urgency. Maybe it's indicating more about what the end result is going to be. Generally just a more effective schedule, and you're giving the customer a little bit more time to pay. And especially working in the B2C space, you're about giving them a pay period to become current with their payment. And that really is helpful in a subscription B2C space. The other thing you need to think about when you're configuring your dunning is what happens at the end of the cycle. So typically, and this was the case when I joined Recurly, typically if they don't pay, their subscription would terminate and the invoice would be written off as past due debt. But there are other cases and other functionality that we've added to fit the needs of your business. So first of all, you have the ability to either terminate the subscription or leave it active. And what's great about leaving the subscription active is, typically more for those B2B companies where you don't want to stop the mission critical service. Maybe you're going to take that payment method, that invoice externally and try some collections, or maybe an account manager might follow up. You're doing a little above and beyond to prevent that immediate shutdown of service. You also have the ability to define whether or not you're going to fail the invoice or leave it past due. And again, that leaving it past due, that's meant for pretty manual collection efforts. So you might try to send that to the collection agency. And if you get it, then the invoice, you still have the ability to mark that revenue as paid through Recurly. So let's talk a little bit about the emails that we send from Recurly as part of your Dunning schedule. So we talked a little bit at the beginning about the two-pronged approach. So emails are truly just sent based on the cadence you define. It's not associated with any payment retries. You're literally letting us know, send an email on day 3, 5, 8, and so on. And the primary call to action here is getting your customers to update their billing information. For whatever reason, we may be having issues with payment collection, and we want that customer to go in and enter their billing information. So you want to focus your call to action on that. You can see here in this test email Alex created, there's a really clear big blue button, update billing information. And he's kept it really simple and straightforward. He's given them a reply to address just in case they have questions or they have other concerns. But this is a really simple email just driving the customer to update their billing information. Some pro tips when you think about your emails. If you haven't used Recurly's hosted account management functionality, it's a great thing to take advantage of. A lot of times what we'll see in our customer email templates is we'll see, hey, if you need to update your billing information, contact support at recurly.com. Not the best, because what that triggers them is to email your support department with their credit card information in raw text, and that's not what you want. Our hosted account maintenance URLs are a parameter you can embed in your emails, and it will allow the customer to log into their account directly in Recurly, no need for a separate username or login, and provide their billing information right there. And the advantage of that is if they have a past due balance, we will immediately try to collect on that past due balance. So the customer gets a real-time notification letting them know if they're back in good standing or if they need to try again. Now, what you're seeing in front of you here is a newer email template for expiring cards. And it's funny that this is a newer email because Recurly does so much work to prevent declines due to credit card expiration dates. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But this is a good email letting customers know that if they're having, if their card expired, that they can do it ahead of time and actually not end up having any sort of issues with their subscription due to that expiration date. Another option we have too is, allow your customers to pause a subscription if they're having a payment issue. This is new functionality as well we wanted to highlight here. I know when I go to try and cancel one of my many subscription services, they've gotten a lot smarter these days. And they will, if I go to cancel, they'll say, do you just need a short break? Do you, need a month or two? Or, can we offer you a coupon or a discount to stick around? So Recurly really is adding a lot of new functionality in this Dunning process to try to keep your customers engaged, to keep them with you, even if they're having a temporary payment issue. So when we think about Dunning and we think about the actual email communication process behind Dunning, there's not a secret formula we can give you. Every single merchant has different needs based on the critical nature of their business, the type of customers they have. I've even seen differences based on age of customers. It's so varied, and it's a really fun science. You have 100% control over how many emails are sent, the contents of the emails, and when they are sent. And that is great because we know our merchants want to control the branding and the communication directly with their customers. But what Recurly takes care of for you are those retries. And that's because while you know your customers best, we know card retries best. We have millions and millions of transactions, transaction data. And so we know exactly what to do with every single type of card retry. So if you've told us you're communicating with your customers over a 16-day cycle, we are going to automatically retry those transactions in a pattern that most makes sense based on our machine learning and our years working in this space. So it's a great combination of factors where we each get to play experts in our fields and try to get that revenue recovered. So as you think about your dunning, keep in mind that on average, and this will vary, again, very greatly based on your business and your customers, about 12% of recurring transactions are declined. The top error message I see is generic decline, which is super frustrating, but that's normal. Generic decline, I'll say in my informal opinion, is insufficient funds. You know, it's just kind of the bank saying it nicely. So that's where really having those retries and those communications going out is important to get the customer to add funds or to change their billing method. So you have the ability to, you know, constantly go in, change your dunning strategy, and make sure that you are coming out on top. And one of the things you may not notice is that every month in your Recurly invoice, we actually tell you how much you have recovered. So of that lost revenue, what have you gained back? And in this case, this example here, here's a merchant who pays $1,700 a month, but they've recovered almost $16,000. And this is a great metric for you to go and show to your boss or your boss's boss, showing the investment, or showing even, you know, if this is a metric you need to improve, giving you that snapshot of this is what we're paying for this service, and this is what it is bringing back into our business. So everything we're showing you here today is designed to really help you increase that Recurly recovered revenue metric. So let's talk about replaced or expiring credit cards, because that's a really challenging topic in the subscription space. There are a couple of services Recurly takes care of, and I alluded earlier that the credit card expired email was something we didn't add in the beginning because we actually do a really great job preventing declines due to that. So let's talk about all we do here. So the first thing is that we use something called continuous authority to advance expiration dates. So if your card is coming up for expiration, what your bank typically does is they just issue you a new card, same card number, but with an expiration date in the future. Because we know that, we can typically see that there's a card coming up for expiration. We'll try to push that date forward 2 or 4 years, and it is typically successful. And that's because the bank isn't really checking to make sure that the expiration date is exactly correct. They're just checking to make sure that it's in the future. So that expiration date logic we put into place takes care of a lot of those expiring cards. Next, we do offer Account Updater. It's a service with a lot of different card types, including Visa, MasterCard, and Discover. This is a service you probably don't even know as a consumer that you participate in. Most banks participate in this service, and essentially it says, you know, if anything has changed with your credit card, your address, your expiration date, they will actually send Recurly that updated information. So we have that right in our hands. This was particularly a great service back when Sam's Club changed their card type from one to another. And all of these people using their Sam's Club MasterCard would have had transactions decline all over the place. But the Account Updater service actually let, you know, all these different merchants and services like Recurly know through Account Updater that the card was updated to a Visa, I believe, and allowed to continue billing the customer. We did just recently announce our card refresher service, and that's through American Express. So very similar to Account Updater, but it allows to get those updated informations from that card network. And then finally, customer emails. So one of the things we didn't talk about is that if a card actually is declined due to an expired, stolen, or lost card, it's what's considered a hard decline. So this is a transaction we don't ever want to try again, because the bank has told us, like, hey, this is a hard decline, don't ever try again. It would be throwing your money away as a merchant to keep retrying that card, because it's never going to be successful. So again, this is where our logic comes into play, where we stop retrying that hard decline, but we continue to send those customer communication emails you've defined. Because in the case of an expired or replaced card that has been through all of these steps without success, the only step forward is to communicate to that customer and get them to update their billing information and get back to good standing. So if you ever want to just, totally geek out over your transaction data, it's absolutely fascinating to look at your invoice export, to pull down where you're getting your recovered revenue from, and see how each of these services is providing recovery to your business. So I jumped ahead a little bit, but just again, talking a little bit more about Account Updater. So Account Updater, if you're not using it, you should absolutely go ahead and enable this. It's enabled on your payment gateway screen in Recurly, and it's pretty much available to every payment gateway that Recurly supports, and so many banks participate in this program. The Account Updater service is totally free through Recurly. A lot of providers out there charge separately for this. We include it as part of our functionality and our pricing. So this is one of those things, go in and click that enable button if you haven't already. And then American Express, a little bit different, just a few more steps where you have to get an American Express service enablement number. But again, that's another one to take advantage of. I believe we just released that about a week or two ago. So I would expect more of you don't have that one enabled, but a good feature to go ahead and turn on.
And Rachel, just really quickly, if they don't have it turned on, if they don't have the AU turned on, how can they access it within their dashboard?
Yep, so within your Recurly admin console, you'd go to the configuration menu on the left, and it would be under your payment gateway section. You'd see this menu on the right side of your screen. So again, I can't say enough, these two sets of functionality, Account Updater and American Express Card Refresher, these are critical to a business doing credit card payments. It's totally just leaving money on the table to not take advantage of this and to work with the customer's bank to get that updated information. It prevents so much, so many issues in terms of customer churn and providing uninterrupted service. All right, so let's talk about recycling. We talked a lot about the customer communication and Account Updater, but recycling is where it gets really interesting, in my opinion. So when we look at the card recycling, we already talked about what we do before they fail. We move expiration dates forward based on the card type, and that's again because of continuous authority and banks only validating the credit card for the future. And then we also apply that Account Updater. But once they fail, we actually look at a number of different bits of data. And this is unique to Recurly. A lot of other providers out there, since they work with tokens, all they're getting back from the payment gateways is an approve or decline. And so it's kind of looking at these declines like, okay, it's a brute force. I'm just going to retry this decline every single day and see if it goes through. But we actually get more granular messaging. So we know if it's a hard decline and this is never going to go through again. We know if it's a soft decline, which means this is probably a temporary issue. Go ahead and retry. We also know if the gateway is down. So if the gateway is down, what we do is we keep retrying that transaction every hour or so until the gateway comes back up. And that way we're not emailing your customer, we're not putting them into dunning until we actually know from the gateway what the response is. We don't want to alert the customer to a problem if it's nothing they have control over. So based on all of those different decline types, we can take into account a number of types of recoveries. So when we're looking at that recovered revenue metric on your invoices, we don't take credit for all this stuff. We're pretty nice about it. So your customer going in and providing an update to their billing information, we don't count that towards our recovery because that's your customer doing it. That's your emails. But it's a great recovery. The customers responded to your outreaches and they are providing updated billing information. Another type of recovery we don't count is prior recovery. And this one we don't count because it's a little bit of a gray area where you think about, you've subscribed a customer, and so you've subscribed them for life. So you have all this future revenue. So if a customer is lost, you've lost all that future revenue. So we do track a metric that says, hey, we recovered this customer in the past, which means we've essentially recovered all future, but we don't count that towards our recovered revenue number. Again, it's a little bit of a gray area. I think we could claim it, but we want to err on the side of caution. And I can talk to you more about where you get that data. We do list in our reporting and our metrics whether or not something was recovered through the account updater services, through the expiration date advancement logic, and also then through retries. So let's look a little bit at what the retry framework looks like. So in this case, we've got a subscription renewal that's going through. And typically what you want to see is just, the subscription renews, payments collected, dunning stops. Great. No problems until next month. That's awesome. But we know that's not reality, especially in this industry. So a lot of other things can happen. So first and foremost, we do reach out to the account updater service 6 days before to try to get that updated information. And if whether or not we have that information, we still retry the transaction, and we might get a soft decline. And so you can see we have a series of emails going out. We might have a gateway issue, so we're going to continue to retry that based on the schedule here. Or we might get a hard decline, and we're not going to retry that, but we're going to continue to send emails to the end customer to try to get them to provide payment. So let's look at a sort of typical dunning cycle from one of your customers. If you think about, your customer subscription renews and the payment immediately fails. The customer is going to get an email immediately. They're going to get a second one 5 days later. And based on the schedule here, they would get another email 5 days later, but it wasn't sent in this case because what happened here was that first 6 days before we sent it to account updater and we didn't get an update. We also tried another account updater update on day 0 and didn't get an update. Finally, 6 days later, because sometimes account updater does take a little bit of time, we actually got that information from account updater. We retried it and the card was successful. So you can see so many things are taking into place here. We've got, account updater working in the background. We've got emails going out to your customer, and we've also got card retries. So lots and lots of things happening here that all lead, hopefully, to an end result of recovery. Now, another thing to think about is that we do offer, longer dunning emails where you might have a delayed email. And sometimes that's just because merchants want to wait and see, if 1 or 2 retries later, maybe we can get the customer back in good standing without ever communicating with them. So what you see here in this case, again, account updater, we tried that a few times, nothing happened here, but the invoice failed payment, and we started sending emails going out. You can see emails here at day 1, 5 days later, 4 days later, 7 days later. In this case, we had a soft decline. It was a call issuer. So pretty generic, not a lot Recurly can do except keep retrying. The customer, though, probably if they reach out to their bank, they're going to find out what the issue is. So that's why we want to keep sending those emails. So because of this error message, Recurly is retrying every 3 days. And then what we did in this case was we actually have what we call sort of a a last ditch recovery attempt. So right before we terminate everything and write off the invoice, we did a last attempt to try the transaction, and it went through. So the email stops and the customer is back in good standing for another month. So let's take a look at some of these schedules. And this is actually a real customer example where we had a customer who would only allow someone to go past due for 2 days before they expired their subscription. And this was because they had a pretty high priced product. They didn't want to give them access for a long period of time without payment. So 2 days and then you were out. The challenge with this dunning schedule was that it really didn't allow Recurly's card recycling functionality to take effect. If we think about the top decline reason being a generic decline, and generic declines are usually retried every 3 days, we didn't even get one retry attempt in here. So there was that collection right away when they renewed, and then 2 days later, essentially the customer churned out. Well, what if this happened over a weekend, or if the customer had a holiday, or the offices were closed? You lost that customer and now you have to try to reacquire them all over again. So I worked with this customer pretty extensively for a series of months and got them to actually extend their dunning to a 28-day cycle. And what you may not notice is that the scale on this chart actually doubled from the previous one. And so you can actually see now by extending their dunning, we start to see these spikes. Day 6 or 7, day 11, and then it starts to sort of trail off towards the end. But these spikes correlate with both emails being sent out and the ability to retry on our end. So by making one little change inside of Recurly, they doubled their recovered revenue and probably kept some happier customers as well. So much more success, and especially around those insufficient funds or those temporary holds where they just needed a little bit more time to try again. So a small change can make a big difference here. But when you're making these small changes, it's really important to measure your success. There's a lot of things going on to play. You want to make sure you don't make any backward facing changes. So let's talk a little bit about what that might look like. And this was a series of 2 merchants I was working with over a period of about 9 months, working with them really closely on their payment decline reasons. The first customer had 22% of their transactions declining, and that's pretty high above our average. We see on general about 12%. Customer B had a 6%, which is better than what we expect, but they're both frustrated because these are generic declines, and they wanted to see this improve. It's important to note too the recurring failure rate. So that customer A, high declines and high recurring failure rate. They also had a really long dunning cycle. It was 90 days, and they were only recovering 2% of their customers. On the other hand, the second customer had a shorter dunning length, 12 days, but they were recovering 20% of their customers. So customer A, 90-day dunning cycle. They were burning their customers out. They were sending them so many emails, the customers were getting frustrated. And what you can see from this chart here is that really after about, we start to see this point of diminishing return after, maybe day 16, where the customers are just, they're not updating their billing information. They're getting these emails thrown at them, and we really can't retry after 30 days. We're not retrying the card. We've hit the number of transactions we can attempt against a specific card. And so all that's happening is that the customer is just getting inundated with emails. And at day 30, they're also getting another invoice. So they're past due, then they're past due again, and it's 90 days. So this just keeps piling up and up and up. Customer B has some of the best recovery rates I've ever seen, and it's because they're taking advantage of what we call at Recurly webhooks. So alongside our dunning notifications, we have system notifications called webhooks. And their tool, we mocked up a little bit of a generic one, but their tool was a Gmail add-on. And so what they did was they used webhooks to put a reminder right inside of Gmail, right where that customer is every day, and getting a reminder about the value, prompting them to update their billing information. And they also did a nice cancel my subscription, which can prevent chargebacks later on. So they're really giving that customer in-app messaging that reminds them to fix this right now, and really seeing some great recovery rates. And for this customer, it wasn't as important for them to send a lot of emails because, again, their users were in that app every single day. They're in Gmail. I don't know about you guys, but my Gmail tab is open all day long. And so that was really where they were getting the most recovery. And you can see that really after about 3 days, their recovery starts to taper because these customers are using the product every single day. For those people after 3 days, they're probably not super invested. They're probably not going to get back into the good graces, but they gave them a 12-day period to pay for this mission critical functionality before they expired the software. So when we go back to looking at customer A and customer B, my initial thought was, well, what the heck is customer A doing? This is not what I would recommend. But I was looking at this the wrong way. I was looking at the wrong numbers, because what I wasn't taking into account was the average dollar amount of every one of these declines. Customer A's invoices were averaging $90,000. So if even with the recovery at 2.1%, for them, any recovery was worth it. And so for them, even though they were giving these customers 90-some days, if that 90 days meant that their external collections agencies or an account manager hounding to update, if it meant that they recovered that invoice, it was totally worth it. So it's great to look at the overall metrics, but also to realize, what does this mean in terms of revenue for my company? Is it better to wait 90 days, or, am I selling something that's $4.99 and after 12 days, it's not worth the additional investment? So these are things to think about when you're playing with your Dunning management settings. So, we're going to jump over to questions, but the other thing I'd love to just reiterate to this group is no one's Dunning is formulaic. These are very, very custom to your audience and your business. And this is something Alex and I love to talk to our customers about. So if you folks are, curious about getting a professional review of your Dunning, you want to do some revisiting, we are absolutely open to sitting down with you folks and seeing what can be done to optimize and digging into where your decline's coming from, where's your recovery coming from. So these are all things we love to do in customer operations, and would certainly be happy to have a custom discussion. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex with Q&A.
Awesome, Rachel. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. Great presentation there on Dunning. And before we get into question and answer session, because this webinar is specific to Recurly merchants, our product team was curious if any of our merchants are looking for additional flexibility out of Dunning. So this is a great time to provide us any feedback. You can use the same format here, use the question box to provide us any feedback. I will personally be relaying that back to our product team. So we'd love to hear any comments, concerns, or additional functionality you'd like to see with Dunning. So with that said, let me reiterate, this is a question and answer session. So on the right side of your screen, you should see a question module where we can ask anything about Dunning here, and we'll go ahead and kick things off. So first question here, Rachel, from Lindsay. Her company is a hybrid between B2C and B2B. The one constant is that most pay via card. Is there a length of Dunning you'd suggest I try? This would be her first time adjusting her company's Dunning length.
Yeah, in general, I would recommend just making it no longer than your shortest subscription. So if you have a monthly subscription, stick at about 28 days. And that's just because you don't want to have that waterfall effect of multiple invoices being created and allowing that customer to really go into sort of a pit of debt. So 28 days is kind of my magic number. And then once you've hit that point, you have a really good data validation point to revisit of, can I make this shorter? Am I still getting a lot of recovery? And I should extend it.
Awesome. Next question here is from Simona. Can the Dunning emails be different in cases where one works with both B2B and B2C customers?
Well, I think this ties pretty greatly into Alex's question about product feedback. So today, the emails are the same across all product types. However, there is one distinction that tends to correlate with B2B versus B2C. We do have separate emails for customers who are paying via credit card. And then we do also have separate emails and Dunning settings for users who are paying via a manual invoice. And that typically tends to be those B2B companies. So often what we see is that merchants define two different schedules, two different sets of email templates to really work with those different audiences.
Great. Next question is from Eric. He's curious, are we able to schedule a time to work with Recurly on improving our Dunning?
I can see that Eric already sent through a session to meet with us. So Eric, I'll be very excited to talk to you tomorrow. It'll be fun to work on this. This is like the highlight of my day is to talk Dunning with people.
Yeah.
And yes,
awesome.
I really am that big of a nerd.
Well, looking forward to that one, Eric. Next one here is from Vlad. He's curious what the normal % of past due invoices for 22,000 customers would be. I know that's tough to do specific math off,
Well, it depends, right? So one of the metrics that I think tends to throw people is that they will look at how many transactions have been declined versus invoices. So, what I think you'll want to look at, Vlad, is how many get to the end of the Dunning cycle without payment. Because we will retry transactions multiple times, and that number of past due invoices will fluctuate over time. We'd have to look at any number of factors about like what your average invoice size is and all sorts of things. So let's Vlad, grab some time. I posted a link to my calendar in the chat. Let's look at it and see, first of all, if what you're experiencing is normal, whatever normal means, and what we can do to improve it.
Next one here from Theodora. How much is the Dunning review?
Oh, it's free. I just like to do this stuff. Yeah, so please, this is what Alex and I do in customer operations. We work with customers. We want to make sure you're successful. This is totally free to grab our time, and we'll talk to you about this. We're big payments nerds, so yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm sure everyone will really appreciate that, Rachel. Next one here is from Sergio. So first off, thank you very much for your time, Rachel. I would like to learn more about the webhook that customer was using in Gmail to let their customer know about payments. Do you have any more information around that?
I sure do. And let me pull up the Recurly docs here so I can actually show you the real example here. Just a moment. So we actually have a series of webhooks that are designed just for Dunning. So I'm going to go ahead and show my screen here. And so if you go to our doc site under Dunning Management, we actually have a whole series of webhooks that are just defined. So we can let you know, first of all, when someone goes into Dunning. We can let you know every time a payment has been failed. And then we can let you know if the payment was successful, so you can take down that banner. And also, probably most importantly, if the subscription gets expired for non-payment, we can send your systems a webhook so you know to deprovision any access they might have.
Great. Next one here is from Rachel. when we view the decline rate in Recurly, is this taking into account manual attempts as well?
Yeah, it is. So when you're looking at your, rough transaction decline rates, it is looking at literally every single transaction. Now, depending on the different metrics you're looking at inside of Recurly, like our out of the box reporting, I'm going to pull up mine just so everyone knows what I'm talking about. So I'm going to share my test site, which doesn't have a ton of data. But when you're looking at our Dunning effectiveness reporting, we are actually looking at it across invoices. So this one is not per transaction. It's based off of, overall invoices, number of invoices, and you can also look at it as dollars. So this would have been really effective in that customer case study where, only 2% of their invoices were represented, but it represented $180,000. And then you can also look at it on a subscription basis as well. So we have a lot of data here. The other one I would consider looking at in relation to this is our subscriber retention report. And this is another great one related to tangentially to Dunning, because it lets you know how long your customers are staying with you and how long you're managing to retain those customers and keep them involved. So often, you might see that if you have a trial and people are not exiting that trial successfully, it might mean that maybe you should be asking for billing information up front, or maybe there are issues with the payment methods they're using. Again, we have so many reports that can tell you a lot of different metrics about your business. And this is another one too. If you want to have a deep dive session on it, I'd be happy to do so.
Fantastic. Well, it looks like you just answered Theodora's other question, was how to find the stats around Dunning. So that's fantastic. And folks, I know we're a couple minutes past our scheduled allotted time, but we will get through the rest of the questions. Looks like we just have a couple more left. But I wanted to reiterate that this webinar is being recorded, and everyone here with us will be receiving a copy of the recording. So if you have to jump, no problem. But next question here from Adam: will Recurly provide dashboard metrics of decline reasons, retry success based on card type, time of day, subscription plan, etc.?
We have a lot of out of the box analytics that are designed to give you some high level reporting on, your churn analysis and your Dunning effectiveness, like you see up on the screen. Personally, I really like data, and I like digging into really just the Excel export. So within our transaction export and the invoice summary export is where you're going to see information about, transactions by card type and country and, error message. And then in our invoice summary report is where you can get a lot of data around, more data, I would say, than what you see here on recovered revenue. We talked about those 5 different categories of recovered revenue, 2 of which we don't populate as our official reasons, the card retries, customer updates, and prior recovery. So these are the official metrics. And then if you really want to see everything, including prior recovery, we have that available in our exports, and happy to dig through that in a personal session as well.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, that wraps up all of the questions here, unless anything else comes in last second. But Rachel, I'm seeing a lot of thank yous. Appreciate your time here. Even some bookings to talk about Dunning coming in, which is absolutely fantastic. So we love to see all the engagement. Again, this is a Recurly merchant specific webinar where we want to help our merchants adopt these features and kind of show them as a best practice and how they can help with your time with Recurly here. So yep, a few more thank yous coming in. And Rachel, I'll just turn it over to you to close this out.
Yeah, just in closing, this is, hopefully you saw this is a topic I'm really passionate about, and, never hesitate to reach out. I think the thing I love about Recurly is just that we get personally invested, I believe, in a lot of our customer businesses. I'm subscribed to so many of you, and we're here to help. So don't hesitate anytime to use that calendar link I put in the chat and grab some time with me.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much. We'll go ahead and wrap it here. Expect a recording and a follow-up here within the next day. Thanks so much and have a great
Thanks,
one.
everyone.
Take care.